This is the Talking Sports Podcast, episode number 7. I'm your host, Peter DiBiasi, alongside Eddie Amadeo. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to have a special announcement. We will be having our second overall interview on this channel. Our first one was Trevor Zegras, number 9 overall pick in the 2019 NHL Draft. The second one will be Luwane Pipkins, former Providence point guard and former UMass point guard. Luwane Pipkins was a fifth-year transfer from UMass to Providence last year, had a great second half to his season, led us to a great record into the Big East tournament, and we were ready to make a nice NCAA tournament run until COVID-19 struck. So we're excited to have Luwane Pipkins join the show in the upcoming future. So look for that after this video in the coming weeks.
Yes, Peter and I are both very excited for Pipkins coming on the show. But as of now, as I mentioned in our last video, we will be doing our 100 subscriber thank you video. So first things first, we just want to thank all of our supporters and all of our subscribers. We never expected to get to this point so far on YouTube, and we hope to have, many successful months to come with this channel. So without further ado, Peter and I, as a thank you, are doing our top 10 quarterbacks of all time. Now, Peter and I have some agreements, disagreements. For those of you who have listened to our radio show in the past, we have done this on our program on the radio, so you may have an idea, for those of you who have seen it, how Peter and I agree and how we disagree with some of the players on this list. So without further ado, I'm going to start with number 10, and I have to go with one of the most versatile quarterbacks in NFL history, in Fran Tarkenton. He is a 9-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time NFL MVP, a 1-time All-Pro, and he played from 1961 until 1978. He had a lengthy career as a mobile quarterback. He was very successful in the run game. He was very successful in the passing game as well. He played for the Minnesota Vikings, and then he joined the Giants for a couple of years, and then he actually went back with the Vikings for a couple of years and then retired. He led the NFL in passing in 1978 with 3,400 yards, and in touchdowns in 1975 with 25 yards. He was a statistical giant for his time. In general, he had 47,000 yards once he retired and 342 TDs. Peter, who's your number 10?
My number 10 is somebody that a lot of people do not have on their list, and that is Troy Aikman. No disrespect to Fran Tarkenton, I do not have him on my top 10. He's an all-time great quarterback. Troy Aikman, 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time Super Bowl champ, threw for a little over 32,000 passing yards and 165 passing touchdowns. Why I have Troy Aikman on this list? He led to the Dallas Cowboys to 3 Super Bowl champs. He was also a 6-time Pro Bowler. He was a winner, and I like to value winning along with stats. He also played in an era where the passing game started to improve more than as it did in previous years. So I have Troy Aikman at number 10, who is one of the greatest Dallas Cowboys quarterbacks of all time, and he is my number 10 quarterback. And a lot of people do not agree with me, but it was a little iffy for a couple quarterbacks that had a number 10, but Troy Aikman gets into that spot as well as with a 6-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time Super Bowl champ. Ed, who's your number 9?
All right, well, just to touch on what you said, Peter, I am a big Troy Aikman fan, although I do not have him on the list. I have much respect for him. In fact, I'm kind of a football nerd. I have a top 100 quarterbacks of all time list in a notebook somewhere. I do have him right outside of the top 10 list, so I do have much respect for him, so I don't disagree with you there. At my number 9, though, I have Dolphins quarterback Dan Marino. For his time, he was a statistical machine. He's a 1-time MVP, a 9-time Pro Bowler, and a 3-time All-Pro. What's missing with Dan Marino is Super Bowl victories. One of the reasons why he gets overlooked and is not higher up in the list is the fact that he had not won a Super Bowl. But if you look at his statistics, in 1984, he threw for over 5,000 yards, and he threw for 48 touchdowns, which absolutely trounced the previous record. These statistics were unheard of at the time, and that's one of the things that really put him on the map of great quarterbacks. Including that season, he led the NFL in a total of 5 seasons in passing yards and 3 seasons in passing touchdowns. Overall, for his career, he had 61,000 yards and he had 420 touchdowns. Dan Marino, statistical machine. One of the negatives, he does not have a Super Bowl victory. Peter?
I love that pick, Ed. I do have Dan Marino on my list. I do not have him at number 9, so we'll stay tuned for that. My number 9 quarterback, San Francisco 49ers, not Joe Montana, Steve Young. Steve Young was a 7-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro, a 3-time Super Bowl champ, 2-time MVP, won the Offensive Player of the Year in 1992, 33,000 passing yards, 233 passing touchdowns, and also rushed for a little over than 4,000 passing yards. One of the earliest running quarterbacks. There was some before him, but he was one of that kind of elaborated the running quarterback position. he won 3 Super Bowl champs following up Joe Montana. He was in his shadow for those first couple of years. Being in Joe Montana's shadow is like being in Tom Brady's shadow or Peyton Manning's. That's a hard shoes to fill. He did it perfectly. Won 3 Super Bowls. What was one of the most dynamic quarterbacks to ever play. Great mobile quarterback. A statistical junkie. Great stats across the board. Steve Young is overlooked, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked quarterbacks of all time, just because he followed up Joe Montana. But he did win 3 Super Bowls and was a 7-time Pro Bowler. So he is my number 9 quarterback on my list.
Okay, so Peter, I do not have Steve Young on my list, unfortunately, but I have much respect for him. He's definitely up there on that top 100 list. And one of the things I want to mention that Peter kind of touched on was the fact that it really proves that developing under a fantastic quarterback has a good effect on you. He played under Joe Montana, and then once he took over, he was a superstar. So it shows that developing under those skilled players really has its effects. So to go to my number 8, I have 2-time Super Bowl championship winner, Roger Staubach. He's currently in the Hall of Fame. He's a 6-time Pro Bowler and a 2-time Super Bowl champion. One thing that many people don't know about him is that after he was drafted, he actually went off to fight in the Vietnam War before coming back and playing in the NFL. He played from 1969 up until 1979, all for the Dallas Cowboys. He's your typical America's team quarterback. He led the NFL in passing touchdowns in 1973, and he had a whopping 3,500 yards in 1979, which isn't a lot today, but for the time, it was very impressive. Peter?
I love the Roger Staubach pick. I have him on my list. I don't have him at number 8, but that's a great pick. My number 8, Eddie does not agree with me. We already know this. That is Drew Brees, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, who's the current quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. 13-time Pro Bowler, has won a Super Bowl, 1-time All-Pro, 2008 and 2001 Offensive Player of the Year. He's thrown for 77,000 passing yards, which is the all-time passing leader. Also thrown for 547 passing touchdowns, which is also the passing touchdown leader. He's an absolute statistical junkie, which I literally just said in my last player. Drew Brees, a lot of people don't have him on his list. He's only won 1 Super Bowl. He is – the knock on him is he is in an era of a passing offense. So that is one knock on him. But you just go down those stats. He's been in the Pro Bowl 13 times. He's won a Super Bowl, all-time passing touchdown leader, all-time passing yards leader. I know he's in the era with a lot of passing, a lot of good quarterbacks, a lot of passing offenses. But Drew Brees has to be on either in your top 10, top 12, top 15, just because of how talented he is and how many stats are just jump off the board. The one thing he's really missing is another Super Bowl victory. And in a lot of playoff successes have not gone his way. You can talk about the Rams, if the refs were involved or any of that stuff. We'll dive into that in another video. But Drew Brees needs another Super Bowl to climb up that list. Imagine if he had 2 or 3 Super Bowls, I think he'd be much higher up this list. So 1 Super Bowl is kind of holding him back, like Dan Marino's kind of get held back with the no Super Bowl wins. But Drew Brees is my number 8, and I know Eddie's not going to agree with me.
Yeah, so Peter, I mean, I do respect your opinion, like I've stated earlier, but I just think that Drew Brees is a product of his time. His highlight is actually that 1 Super Bowl victory and, of course, his passing yards record. But he is a product in his time, and how I'm saying that is that many quarterbacks nowadays that are throwing for so many more yards than they used to. I mean, we're seeing back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you throw for 3,000 yards. That was fantastic. Nowadays, you throw for 3,000 yards. It's like, come on, man, you can do better than that. I mean, we're seeing mediocre quarterbacks throwing for 4,000 yards. Oh, we saw Jameis Winston this past season, who's a pick machine, and many people think does not have the ability to be a leader, throw for 5,100 yards. So Drew Brees, he's had a lot of good targets. Is he a good quarterback? Yes, he is. I have much respect for the guy. Is he a top 15 quarterback? Maybe. Is he a top 20? Absolutely. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. But I do respect your opinion. I just don't think he's a top 10 quarterback for the winning reason. He's not much of a clutch quarterback. He needs to win a little bit more, in my opinion, to really prove that he can be that team leader. And as for all those yards, yes, it's really impressive. And yes, it's not really like something we've seen before, except for maybe Peyton Manning or Dan Marino. But he really is, I think, a product of his time. And that's why he's such a statistical giant. Agree to disagree there. But at number 7, I'm going way back to 1937, slinging Sammy Baugh. And all you young kids out there probably never even heard of him. And that's why oftentimes I criticize people who say, oh, Drew Brees is top 10 of all time, Aaron Rodgers is top 10 of all time, when you can't even compare him to all the other guys. Like, some people don't know who Sammy Baugh is. Some people don't know who Otto Graham is, and they're the ones claiming that Rodgers is top 10 of all time. If you don't know who you're competing against, you can't make that claim. So that's – sorry to get off topic, but that's one of my big pet peeves when it comes to people, rating football players. But back to Sammy Baugh. He's a 6-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time NFL champion, and a 4-time All-Pro. Sammy Baugh is probably one of the most versatile players of all time. Aside from being a good quarterback, he also played defense, believe it or not. He had 11 interceptions in his 4th year in the NFL on defense. I mean, that's crazy. You can't see any player nowadays having that sort of success. But back to the passing game, he led the NFL in passing yards in 4 of his – how many seasons is this? You know what? I'm horrible at math. Don't worry. He played around 20 years. But to say the least, he was a very skilled quarterback, especially for his time. In 1947, he threw for 2,900 yards in 12 games and threw for 25 touchdowns as well. Now, you got to remember the rules at this time. There was no pass interference, and receivers got absolutely rocked. And for him to be able to get the ball into the receiver's hands, I think it was, what are we looking at here for statistics for that? 210 times is absolutely impressive, especially for this time. So Sammy Baugh, aside from being one of the best players of all time, he's also one of the best quarterbacks of all time. And I think a lot of the young guys, especially our age, overlook him because he played such a long time ago. Peter?
Ed, I might be one of those young guys you're talking about. For my reasons, why I don't have Sammy Baugh on my list, perfectly fine why you have him on your list, agree to disagree. One of the reasons is I think he just played too long ago in an era where the passing offense wasn't as good, which is good for him because he was one of the greatest passers of all time.
But you got to look at the defense as well. Receivers got rocked. There weren't as many rules. I mean, that's one of the reasons why so many, quarterbacks like Drew Brees, Jameis Winston, Eli Manning are throwing for monstrous yards, is because there's so much pressure on those defensive players to stay away from the receivers. Refs are throwing flags left and right. So it's just a different era nowadays, and you got to respect guys like Sammy Baugh who are able to get into the receiver's hands with such tough conditions.
I'm not saying like I don't respect him. I think he was a great quarterback. I think he just played too long ago where the era of talent was nowhere near what we've seen 80s, 90s currently, or 2000s. You can't even be comparable. He played way too long ago, in my opinion, to just have him in your top 10 list. He didn't throw enough attempts, completions. It's just not enough stats across the board, and in the era where the talent was not even close to where we see today, or in the 80s and 90s, to have him on the list. But go to my number 7, Roger Staubach, who Ed had a couple spots earlier. Like Ed said, 6-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champ, threw for 22,000 passing yards and 153 passing touchdowns. One of the great Cowboys quarterbacks, along with Troy Aikman. So 2 Cowboys quarterbacks on my top 10 list. Roger Staubach won 2 Super Bowls, 6-time Pro Bowler. So he was a winner. Threw in an era where there wasn't a lot of passing, but he started developing his passing game. Great quarterback of all time. So I have Roger Staubach at my number 7.
Okay, so I'm going to my number 6. Peter, as I had Roger Staubach in my number 8, I agree with you there. We have a pretty similar school of thought there, against some of the other things you said earlier. But to continue, at number 6, I have quarterback John Elway. John Elway was one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch in the highlights because if you look at what he did, he was a good quarterback for a very long time and just didn't win the Super Bowl. And finally, in his old age, he banged out 2 Super Bowls in a row and then retired in 1997 and 1998, which you really got to respect. I played for a long time, from 1983 until 1998. As I said, he was a 2-time Super Bowl champion and a 1-time NFL MVP, and he went to the Pro Bowl 9 times. He led the NFL in passing yards in 1993 with just over 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. In his career, he had 51,000 yards, which is up there. I think it's still in the top 5 yards of all time, and he threw for 300 touchdowns. John Elway, definitely a clutch quarterback, and kind of shows that, as time goes on, you could get better, like fine wine. Some people argue Tom Brady did the same thing himself. As he got older, he got better. So John Elway is definitely one of those more interesting quarterbacks to watch. Peter?
This is the first time, Ed, we are going to agree on a pick, and we're going to agree on a slot. Number 6, John Elway. I'm not going to repeat what you just said, but 9-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champ, won an MVP, threw for 51,000 passing yards, 300 touchdowns. You're right. He aged like fine wine. Wasn't a winning quarterback for his first half of his career. Won 2 Super Bowls towards the end. Can't fault a guy for that. John Elway in a great draft class along with Jim Kelly, who's not on my list, and I'm assuming he's not on Ed's list.
You had to bring up Jim Kelly, didn't you, Peter?
Had to bring Jim Kelly, who I love Jim Kelly, but not a top 10 quarterback, along with Dan Marino and John Elway, which one of the greatest quarterback draft classes of all time. Didn't win a lot of Super Bowls, but were one of the most talented quarterback classes of all time. So I have John Elway at 6. I don't see anything wrong with that. Almost in the top 5, but maybe if you want another Super Bowl early on in his career, he could slide into that top 5. John Elway, a great quarterback, and right now he is the GM of the Denver Broncos, trying to build another winner with Drew Lock. So Ed, who's your number 5?
Number 5, we're going back to the old players. Otto Graham. Some people argue this guy's in the top 3 of all time. You should have seen this guy play. I recommend you go back and watch some of his highlights. He was very, very skilled. He was a 7-time All-Pro, a 5-time Pro Bowler, and even though this was the time before Super Bowls, he had 3 NFL championships in 9 years in the football league at the time. He played from 1946 to 1955, and in those 9 years, he led the NFL 5 times in passing yards and 3 times in passing touchdowns. He started actually 9 games in 1947, and he threw for 2,700 yards and 25 touchdowns, which was very, very impressive. And his rookie year in 1946, he had a passer rating of 112.1, which was a record at the time. So Otto Graham, I'd say, after Sammy Baugh, was one of those first really, star, I don't want to say chosen one quarterbacks, in the football league. So Otto Graham is one of the guys I really respect, as a leader and as a quarterback. I mean, many of you guys probably have never seen a single throw in his highlights, which I recommend, as I said earlier, you do. But he's definitely one of those guys that I respect for getting the NFL going and making football a really popular sport to watch in America. Peter?
And I'm with you on the pick with having Otto Graham. He's not in my top 10, which I know you're not going to agree with, but go back and watch his highlights along with Sammy Baugh. They're both great quarterbacks to watch. So moving on to my number 5, Dan Marino, who Ed had a little farther down the list, didn't have him in his top 10. Dan Marino, 9-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, won an MVP, 1984 Offensive Player of the Year, 61,000 passing yards, which is a lot for his era, and 420 passing touchdowns. The one thing holding back Dan Marino, like Ed touched on earlier, he does not have a Super Bowl. He went to a Super Bowl his first year, never went back again. So teams, when you get to a Super Bowl, make the most of your opportunity because you never know what's going to happen. Going to Super Bowls, not an easy thing. Dan Marino, in my opinion, people might not like this saying, Dan Marino is probably my favorite pure passer of all time. Just how he threw the ball. If you watch his highlights, his deep ball wasn't like a normal deep ball. It kind of had a little more of a line drive deep ball. Kind of just a little sailed it over the defenders. He had a great arm, like I mentioned with John Elway, in that class, draft class with John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly. Dan Marino, one of the best pure passers, maybe the best pure passer of all time. I don't wish he won a Super Bowl, but for his sake, he could be much higher up in Eddie's list or maybe my list if Dan Marino maybe had 2 Super Bowls like John Elway. But Dan Marino, great stats across the board, great quarterback. Wish he had a chance to go back to a Super Bowl, but Dan Marino is my number 5.
Yeah, Peter, I agree with what you said there. Of course, a little high for me. But one thing I want to say, and I'm going to, leave this to you to analyze it. And this is kind of a quote that I've always said to a lot of people when I'm arguing about, good quarterbacks, is that coaches choose quarterbacks not to get fantastic statistics, but to bring them to the big game. Do with that what you will. Number 4, I have Peyton Manning. All right, probably one of my arch nemesises for football, considering the fact that I'm a big Tom Brady fan, and Brady Manning are probably one of the biggest quarterback rivalries in the history of football. But you got to respect the guy. 2-time Super Bowl winner, and probably his biggest statistic is the fact that he was a 5-time NFL MVP. I believe that is an NFL record. And he was also a 4-time Pro Bowler. Right when he came out in 1998, he was a statistical machine. He threw, 3,700 yards his rookie year, which was a record at the time. He threw 26 touchdowns. And then as his career went on, he led the NFL in passing yards in the year 2000 and in 2003 as well. And then in 2004, he threw 49 touchdowns, breaking Dan Marino's record. So as you can see, Manning was probably one of the biggest statistical machines. Was he a clutch guy? No, he wasn't. You'd see him in the big game. He always looked a little bit nervous. He never really could get those, those 2-minute warning drives, those game-winning drives that, players like Tom Brady were able to do. And, of course, his highlight year, everybody knows, 2013. He absolutely trounced all the quarterback records. He threw for 5,400 yards, and he threw for 55 touchdowns. Absolutely insane. Got to respect the guy, even though I'm not the biggest fan in the world. Peter, what do you think?
Ed, I love the pick. I do not have him at 4. I have him a little higher up on my list. My number 4. I know you respect this guy, Johnny Unitas. 10-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro, won a Super Bowl champ when the Super Bowl was invented. He was also a 3-time NFL champ before the Super Bowl era, 3-time MVP, threw for 40,000 passing yards and 290 touchdowns, which is a lot back then. That's a lot of good stats. Johnny Unitas, Baltimore Colts quarterback, is a winner, 4-time overall champ, which is one was a Super Bowl. You people can have him at 2, 3, 4, 5. He fluctuates in this list, but he's undoubtedly a top 5 quarterback. I have him at number 4. Johnny Unitas is probably one of the great passers of all time that kind of started the trend of just passers. Overall, won a Super Bowl, a 3-time NFL champ. A lot of people haven't watched his highlights. Me and Eddie were not alive for that, obviously. So go back on YouTube, whatever you want to watch some Johnny Unitas highlights. And me and Eddie say, watch all these guys' highlights that you have not got to see live, because me and Eddie have not seen a lot of these guys live because we weren't alive. So go back on YouTube, 20-minute video of Johnny Unitas, Roger Staubach, John Elway, Sammy Bond, Otto Graham, all those guys. Great highlights, great quarterbacks. So Johnny Unitas is my number 4 quarterback on my list.
So my number 3, not to repeat what you said, but I also have Johnny Unitas. Peter, I'm glad you put somebody who, decently old on your list. You got to respect that. He was a 1-time Super Bowl champ and a 3-time NFL champion. Really impressive. However, I believe he did not start in the Super Bowl championship during Baltimore Colts when he was playing for the Baltimore Colts. I believe that was Earl Morrall. But so he was a 3-time starting champ, a 10-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro. And he had a long career, 1956 to 1973. Led the NFL in passing yards 4 times and touchdowns 4 times as well. So I'm not going to, reminisce about him like Peter did, but absolutely great quarterback, legend, really put the passing game on the map. Peter?
My number 3, who Ed just mentioned at number 4, Peyton Manning, who's probably one of my favorite quarterbacks of all time, along with Jim Kelly, a couple other names that I don't have to mention. Peyton Manning, 14-time Pro Bowler, like Ed said, 7-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champ, 5-time MVP, won Offensive Player of the Year in 2004 and 2013, which he broke numerous quarterback records, threw for 71,940 passing yards, 539 touchdowns. The knock on him was what Ed mentioned. He wasn't clutch in the playoffs. He did win 2 Super Bowls, which is a lot of Super Bowls to win. But if Peyton Manning, like in the Seattle Super Bowl where they got absolutely trounced on, I believe that was the year he broke all the records. Maybe not. I'm not 100% sure. It was, okay. So, yeah, they got absolutely trounced. No, Seattle was a great team. They had Legion of Boom. But you would think Peyton Manning would have put more of a fight. He did come out and did win a Super Bowl towards the end of his career. He wasn't the best state, but his best years were the Colts and the beginning year of his Denver Broncos. Peyton Manning, you can have him at 3. You can have him at 4, 5, maybe even 2 if you really, really love Peyton Manning. But he is definitely a top 5 quarterback. And great guy overall. And I know Ed, not the biggest fan because he's a Patriots fan. I have no hatred towards Peyton Manning. So Peyton Manning is my number 3 quarterback.
Okay, Peter, I agree with what you said. Now to go at number 2, I think Peter and I are going to get really similar at this point, unless Peter really hates Tom Brady. But number 2, we're going to go with Joe Montana. And the reason why Joe Montana is so great are for 2 reasons. A, he won 4 Super Bowls, and B, he was an absolute clutch machine. I would say he's the best clutch quarterback of all time, more so than Tom Brady. I'm going to piss off a lot of Pats fans by saying that, but he was a clutch quarterback. He wouldn't be, top 3 quarterback of all time if he didn't win the games and if he didn't really rise to the occasion late in the game in many of these tight matchups. Because he really wasn't a statistical machine. I mean, if you look at the list, his highest yardage was 3,900 yards in 1983, and his highest touchdowns were 31 in 1987. Now, people say but it was different back then. People threw for less yards. Not really true. Dan Marino was crushing records now at this point in time, throwing for 5,000 yards, 4,500. And don't forget about Warren Moon. He was crushing yards as well. He was throwing 4,000 after 4,000 after 3,000. So you really can't argue that quarterbacks didn't throw for many yards at this time. But the reason why he was so good was because he was an absolute clutch machine, and that's why I highly respect Joe Montana. Peter, number 2.
I'm not a fan of the Patriots like everybody else. Not a Patriots hater though. Not biased. Joe Montana is my number 2 quarterback of all time. 8-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, 4-time Super Bowl champ. Like Ed mentioned, 1, 2 MVPs, 1 Offensive Player of the Year. I don't want to repeat what Ed said, but he was a clutch quarterback. His passing stats they don't jump off the board. If you look at a couple guys behind him, John Elway threw for 11,000 more passing yards. Dan Marino threw for 21,000 more passing yards. Johnny Unitas only threw for 200 200, 300 less passing yards. So his stats weren't jumping off the board for that time, which is kind of surprising. You would think Joe Montana, the second greatest quarterback of all time, his stats would just be like, whoa, eye-popping. No, he won games. That's all you have to do. He won 4 Super Bowls, passed the torch on to Steve Young, and then who won 3 Super Bowls. So 49ers had a great couple of quarterbacks. Joe Montana is my number 2. And I know Ed, and both me and Ed can both agree on the number 1 quarterback on our list.
Absolutely. I think what really sealed the deal for Tom Brady was winning that 5th Super Bowl, coming back against the Atlanta Falcons. I'm not going to dive too deep into his statistics. You guys know them. 6-time Super Bowl champion, 3-time NFL MVP, 14-time Pro Bowl. He shattered records. Look at his NFL career, playing from 2000 to 2019 and still playing. Absolutely insane. He broke the record in 2007 by throwing 50 touchdowns. And if you look at since 2012, when he was considered in his old age, 4,000 yards after 4,000 yards after 4,000 yards. And the only time he threw for 3,000 was when he was suspended. So Tom Brady has really stood the test of time. He showed that in his old age, he can still win games, win Super Bowls, and put up huge numbers. Tom Brady, forever will be remembered as one of the greatest athletes of all time, if not the greatest, and one of the best players in the NFL of all time. I have much respect for the guy. I grew up watching him, and really we should be all thankful. Even the people who don't like him just because he wins, which is the reason why people argue that, oh, I don't like him because he cheats. No, what do you mean he cheat? So what? He maybe knew about some assistant guy deflating a football in the first half of a game that they didn't even get all their points in. Give me a break. Brady is absolutely fantastic. You guys just didn't like him because he wins. All right, and we all got to respect this guy for accomplishing what he's accomplished. Peter?
He's my number 1 quarterback. I could be a hater and just put him at number 55, but I'm not going to do that. Tom Brady is my number 1 quarterback. I don't want to repeat anything that Eddie said, but when he did win his 5th Super Bowl beating the Atlanta Falcons, that kind of put him over the top. If he only had 4 Super Bowls, it would be a great debate. Me and Ed could debate just Joe Montana versus Tom Brady, and that would be a fair argument. If Tom Brady had 4 Super Bowls and Joe Montana had 4 Super Bowls, you would just be like, well,
Joe Montana has 2. Even when Tom Brady had 4 Super Bowls, he was still better than Manning.
Yeah, so yeah, when Joe
Montana, in my opinion, but
yeah, Joe Montana with 4 Super Bowls, and then if Tom Brady had 4 Super Bowls at the time, but he did beat the Atlanta Falcons, which, like Ed said, put him over the top. 6-time Super Bowl champ. Nothing else you can say for him. Wish him success in Tampa Bay, out of the division. So super excited for that. But Ed, this was a fun video, really fun video. We each have a different list, which is we won. You guys don't want us to, me and Ed, be like, oh, we each have the same list. If we each have the same list, what's the fun of that? Nobody's going to watch our video. So
exactly. I love when we do stuff like this, Peter, as you said, me and you disagreeing, we agreeing. These are the kind of, down-to-earth conversations that we'll have, offside of the camera. Like Peter and I will talk on the phone. Oh, what do you think? Who do you think's better? Things like that. These are the really down-to-earth type of things. It's a lot different than like a power rankings video or a mock draft or something like that. It's more conversation-based, and that's why we really, love to do things like this. It kind of brings us back to the radio days we were, back in the WDOM studio. So we really want to thank you guys for 100 subscribers and just for, being really loyal to us and for all the views. We never expected really to get to this point. So we really, really, really want to thank you all, especially bearing with us during this tough time with COVID-19 that the country is going through right now. So without further ado, you have been listening to the Talking Sports podcast hosted by Peter DiBiasi and myself, Eddie Amadeo. And you were watching the top 10 quarterbacks of all time. This is Eddie and Peter signing out.